Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe this video for more content on any of your alternative football favorites. Now, on to the show. Join me today. I have a special guest, a long-awaited guest for the Gridiron Gallery podcast. I've been looking forward to talking to this gentleman. It is Mike Mitchell of XFL News Hub and XFL Board. He is what I would say, not just an XFL insider, an alt football insider, if you will. One of the best in the biz. Mike, thank you for joining the show. I know we've been kind of back and forth trying to get this arranged. You're a very busy fellow, so I appreciate your time being on here. How are things lately? You got a lot of stuff you're covering. I mean, besides just everything else going on, XFL, CFL, you name it, you're on it right now, right?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Zach, for having me on. And thanks for your patience. I know we've been trying to hook this up for a while. Yeah. I write about the Jets. I write about, obviously, the XFL, now the USFL, the CFL. I've been covering the Toronto Argonauts extensively. This has been a crazy month with a training camp starting and, getting an opportunity to interview coaches and interview players, as I've had for CFL News Hub. So, yeah, pretty hectic time, but there's nothing else I'd rather be doing than covering football and football leagues. So that's just been a story of my life since I was a very young boy.
Yeah, I mean, football, if you love the sport, I mean, you can't get enough of it. I understand completely. That's kind of myself, I feel too. So I can relate very much to that. Today, I'm going to be pulling for your USFL inside information, or at least just kind of discussing what's been out there so far. You actually had recently a write-up for XFL News Hub discussing potential head coaches, locations, team structures, and even ownership structure, which has been a lot of the conversation as of late, thanks to a report by the San Antonio Express News about Rick Neuheisel, as well as Bob Morris, ex-gunslingers, wanting to potentially be owners of the new gunslingers. So a lot's kind of come across that. And let's just dive in with that first point. The ownership structure, which it came up in that report from Greg Luca of the San Antonio Express, that Bob Morris and Rick Neuheisel both reached out to a undisclosed USFL official. They had a conversation. They want to be involved in this. The city of San Antonio doesn't have any relationship to this discussion, but it's talks that San Antonio would be willing and open to have this be in development. The ownership structure has been up for debate since. It sounds like, at least in your write-up, that owners per team is kind of becoming what might happen. Is that what I'm understanding?
Absolutely. That's the desired model. Because when you think about it, I'm not saying something that everybody doesn't already know, but running a pro football league is a very expensive proposition. And that's something that Brian Woods knows, that Fox knows. And, there's a lot of variables here that are unknown. The wishful thinking is that Fox will step in and all of a sudden take 50% ownership and put their significant resources and capital into the league and start funding it. But I haven't received any indication, and I hope this changes, but I haven't received any indication that Fox is going to be doing that they're going to spend tens upon millions of dollars to fund all the teams in the leagues and hire all the executives and everything else. So that leads to where you're going to get the funding to fund 8 to 10 to maybe 12 teams in year one. And that's therein lies the rub. So, when Brian Woods, way back when, it's not too long ago, ran the XFL, the desire of that league, the ultimate goal of that league was to become a developmental league for the National Football League. And they actually played games in the fall. And what they attempted to do was to line up ownership.
Right.
And so, yeah, unfortunately, it's easier said than done. So, the idea was to get an ownership group to pay a franchise fee and, and then cover the cost of their individual team. Mm-hmm. So you can see why there's an interest. If Fox isn't putting in significant capital into the league and Brian Woods and his group of investors don't have the tens upon millions of dollars to fund the entire league, you can see why they would be interested in trying to secure ownership for their teams to make it easier for them. The fun part of these leagues is thinking about the markets and the players and the colors and the uniforms and all that. The boring stuff is all the business stuff. How much you're going to pay for venues, the logistics, the travel expenses, equipment, scheduling, marketing, promotional, all the little T's you got to cross and I's you got to dot, and all those cliches, all those like small, minute things that people don't think about. Those things add up. Just equipment alone, all that. So it's very expensive. Insurance. So when you think about it, if Fox isn't putting in significant capital into the league, and if Woods's group is not, or somewhat, then you're going to need owners to cover the costs. And even if you're shortchanging players and maybe paying them, 20 grand a season or what have you, 30 grand a season, depending on how long your season is, you still have to cover all those other costs that are involved.
Right.
So I can see now whether or not they'll be able to achieve that goal of getting, say, 8 separate team owners in year one. That remains to be seen. It could be a situation where the league has, ownership of 5 or 6 of the teams, and maybe they find 2 owners. Now, San Antonio would be ideal. Now, the way I look at it, if I was running the league, and I know there's a lot of variables involved, you need to figure out how you're going to get venues and scheduling and everything else. And venues are costly, paying rent on venues and all that. So sometimes that helps you decide where to go and where not to go. But if it were me, I would have San Antonio and St. Louis as 2 markets that I would look, specifically if the league decides, which it's looking like, because 2 factors against the USFL is time and money. And if the league decides to do a hub city environment for 2022, which makes financial sense, it's maybe not sexy to have the Austin Stallions playing in San Antonio for a year,
Right.
but from a financial standpoint, it does make sense to have maybe multiple, if you could have just 2, but if maybe you have multiple hub sites where you have less travel, less expenses, you don't have to worry about hiring team presidents and full staffs, marketing, promotion, selling tickets, all that. If you had 2 hub sites, if you had only 2 hub sites and you did San Antonio and St. Louis, I guarantee you in those 2 markets, you would sell tickets, even if there are other teams playing there. Even if it's all of a sudden you're going to San Antonio to watch Austin take on, I don't know, it's the Generals. Let's just say the Generals, right? The New Jersey Generals.
Talk southern, region.
Right. Yeah. Whatever it may be, whomever it may be, whomever is in the mix there, because the league has over 20 different team names.
Right.
I think it's 24 different team names. And then a good number, 16 or so, are full USFL team names from the past: San Antonio Gunslingers and the Tampa Bay Bandits and the Orlando Renegades and the Jacksonville Bulls and several others. So it would make perfect sense to have 2 hub sites if you're going to do the hub site model for a year and attempt to use that year to sell the franchises to owners and to sell it to sponsors and markets and everything else, because it might take a while to line all that up. Then the places to do it in would be, in my opinion, you want to look at the AAF and the XFL. What 2 markets were most successful for those 2 previous spring pro football leagues? And it was San Antonio and St. Louis.
There you go.
And so I think if that would be my call. Now that, like I said, that's easier said than done, because the XFL, when they were with St. Louis, they worked out a pretty good deal. St. Louis was skeptical. The St. Louis Commission was very skeptical about the XFL league, especially what happened with the alliance. And so they wanted guarantees and assurances from the XFL financially that they would run games and complete a season and all that. The way the XFL worked it out was pretty smart business-wise, because if the games exceeded a certain amount of fans and attendance, then the XFL would get a larger cut, and the stadium itself and the commission would benefit from it. So as we saw with the XFL, they're getting ready to host 40,000 plus in St. Louis. So they were going to end up making even more money than they already made, because it was a smash hit. And we saw San Antonio in the Alliance a couple of years back, how well they did. So that's something to consider in this, whether or not the USFL eventually lands on those. I knew you talked about the San Antonio article with the gunslingers and former player and all that. We know the city of San Antonio specifically stated in that article that they hadn't heard anything from the USFL. And that would lead you to believe that if they're planning on playing in 2022 in either February or March or April, that they would already have something set up with the city. They already contacted the city. They would, the wheels would be in motion. Now, I'm not saying that those wheels can't be set in motion in the future, but as of present time, the city of San Antonio hasn't heard anything from the USFL.
That is a peculiar part of that write-up, is that they if they're bringing traditional teams, and I know that not all of them are in the trademark traditional cities. You mentioned the Austin Stallions. I mean, Birmingham alone has said, not only with the XFL, but now with the new USFL, they're like, we want these guys in our town, which, put two and two together, Stallions should be playing in theory in a future date back in Birmingham again. It wouldn't be
Right.
Austin Stallions if
And
the
they have
USFL
several
picks that
team
up.
names. I'm sorry to interrupt you. They have several team names lined up for Austin too. It doesn't, they have the Wranglers, which also could be in Arizona.
Right.
And they have a few other names as well. So they have 5 different team names for Austin. So it doesn't mean they're going to end up with the Stallions per se. And I agree with you. Birmingham Stallions would be a perfect fit. When you think about it, though, the St. Louis Stallions wouldn't be a bad play either. Now, the reason why I bring that up, because people make the assumption. Now, we know the Stallions were going to be an NFL team in the 90s. That with the uniforms were made for that team. They were all set up, ready to go. People don't know the full history of that, but the New England Patriots were almost in St. Louis. How crazy would that have been?
Yeah,
they came before Bob Kraft bought saved the Patriots franchise, which was down in the dumps. They were headed to St. Louis. The Stallions was trademarked, ready to go, uniforms and all that. So the reason why I bring up that possibility is people make the assumption that some of these names are going to be specifically in those markets. But if the USFL doesn't work it out with, say, Tampa or Jacksonville or what have you, they're not going to have 24 teams in 2022. It's not feasible, not possible. It's not happening. They'll be happy if they could get 10 or 12. They'll settle for 8. It's very telling that in their press conference, they said a minimum of 8 teams, and in their press release. So they're shooting for 10 or 8, or they're shooting for more than 8, but they'll settle for 8. But they have so many names. The Spring League has so many names, team names that are trademarked. That they have the Generals, obviously, and the Alphas and the Blues and the Conquerors and everybody else. It's not the linemen. It's not out of the realm of possibility that one of those names could be attached to one of those cities, whatever cities they end up with. So everyone's assuming, the USFL is kind of crazy, their history, because the Stars played in Philadelphia and Baltimore. The Renegades were all over the place. So the Breakers played in Boston and Portland. So we assumed the Stallions would be in Birmingham, but Birmingham's another market I've always rooted for. They've been in every one of these types of leagues over the years, and for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out. Some of it bad luck, some of it just didn't work. The original XFL and the AAF and the World League of American Football and everything else. So I'd like to see that market, and I know they want one. So you have to go to markets. My feeling with USFL is they should go to markets that are thirsty for these leagues, that really have a strong desire for them. And so Birmingham has a new stadium situation, and I think it's worth giving it another go and crossing your fingers that it'll work this time with a place like Birmingham. You'd obviously love to see places like San Diego and Oakland and all that. The great thing about the St. Louis in the XFL is the XFL was trying to prove that it belonged on the pro football landscape. And St. Louis was in the same boat. Yes. They had that fan base, that city was out to prove something. We deserve pro football. We're a great market. So that was the perfect market for the XFL to go in business with, because they had the same agenda. They were lined up perfectly together. And so that's what you got to do with the USFL. You have to line yourself up with markets that will support these teams with their full passion, full heart. And I think San Antonio, with especially St. Louis, and then you think of other markets like Birmingham and others, they have to make it work venue-wise. They have to make it work financially. They have to find, whoever steps up as a potential owner, that's what if somebody steps up in Jacksonville, they'll give Jacksonville a franchise. That's for sure. If you get the money. So that's what it's going to come down to probably at the end of the day. But yeah, you look at the calendar right now, and I'm from what I'm hearing, there's probably going to be news in August. And hopefully by the time this conversation airs, we'll have heard something before then. But you have to figure that they have to get going soon. If the likelihood of them actually setting up shop in 10 different markets, time's working against them doing that. It's tight. I'm not saying nothing is impossible if you got the money. There's a will, there's a way. But it's not looking like, I'm not saying that the Fox and the Spring League are going to run a bare bones league and do exactly what they did with TSL last year, but I don't think it's the way things are set up on the calendar. I don't think it's going to be too far from it. It might run something similar to TSL, only this time with USFL team names. It's a big factor attaching cities to your teams. I know they had 408,000 viewers, and that was basically by default. It's like a secret that Fox even had a football league on their network. Barely nobody knew about it. Mainstream media didn't cover it. You didn't see articles about Ryan Mallett and how good the Generals passing game was anywhere, except for us, you know.
Sure.
The guys who cover the alternative leagues like Newsroom and News Hub and Board and everything else. But when you attach city names to your teams, that in theory will help you increase your ratings, because now, rather than the generic Generals taking on the generic Conquerors, you might have Austin and San Antonio attached to that. And so you have those markets watching, or say Orlando or whomever's involved. So that was a big thing in the XFL too. You had those specific markets did really well in the ratings. Now, if it was just the Battlehawks taking on the Guardians, it wouldn't have done as well. But when you attach St. Louis to it in New York, all of a sudden you get a pretty good, decent rating. So I would look at that as well. You know, I'm sure Fox has this information. What markets did we do best in? It was like with the XFL, what stood out the most was how great Ohio was in the ratings.
Yes,
weekly, every single game, they were in the top 3, whether Cardell Jones played or not. That tells you to me, I've been a big proponent of Columbus in the past. So anywhere in Ohio's a great state for football. So anyway,
there, you know,
yeah, great history. And I think Ohio's tremendous. So, and then you saw that in the XFL, every single XFL game, top 3 market ratings, Ohio's in there. They didn't have a team. So that tells me that they're interested in that concept. So anyhow, but yeah, so them by default should get better viewership because the USFL has some kind of name, has more value than the Spring League name. I'm not trying to be detrimental or negative towards the Spring League, but the USFL is on a different popularity scale. At least people kind of sort of know what the USFL is. And then if you attach your teams to cities, that'll help you with attention. Fox has to be a little more proactive. If they're not putting in a lot of money into the league, they're going to need to promote it more. You know, the cable numbers weren't great. 81,000 was their average there. So you'd like to do a little bit better than that. I understand they were on FS1 and FS2, and they had an issue. One of their games was delayed and they played late at night. So I get it. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt on that, but they should do better than 81,000. That's better than they did 30,000, which they averaged in the fall of 2020.
That's true.
But that's much better. I have no question. And being on Fox helped promote the fact that they had other games, that they actually existed. So that helps. But we'll see where it goes. It's going to be fascinating to see the steps that Fox and the Spring League take in promoting and, getting the league more attention.
Yeah, and Fox is going to have to get some strides in promotion. Now, I will say one thing. My profession outside of this is television. They did make bare minimum, at least, dates for the Fox broadcast network game. I'll give them that credit. But you were absolutely right where, if we're talking like, say, the XFL in terms of like promotion, it was leagues behind anything and definitely just testing the markets. And talking at least the bubble format, or I guess the hub format, but it's similar way, hub bubble. I just see this as a way like for helping. You're saying sell the teams. It's almost like you're parading them around. Like, well, look, we were getting views. You can come to the games yourself and check out all the rosters. Shop at your leisure. If you live in this market, and especially you can research it easily now for the USFL and the historical side of it. If you're a local, person looking to throw some change around, of course. So that's a possibility. I see it, and especially the short run, at least runway, really has me kind of going, okay, I know they've worked behind the scenes, but I still have a concern when it was, now it's 9 months out and it's June 3rd, and you're saying we're doing this next year, and you have all these trademarks with the cities. Now, credit, the cities can change. You just said that, but still, the assumption for public perspective is, it's going to be cities, and I am nervous, of course, about that. Also, the elephant in the room I have to bring up is, some people look at Brian Woods' past and go, okay, this guy's running it. What's he been doing at times, unfortunately, with some of his ventures? I mean, TSL still exists, but even the late fall winter version of it didn't exactly end on a great note, all things considered. So you have to address that at some point. The fact that he
at the end of the day,
Brian.
At the end of the day, I'm not trying to say this in any way to be negative towards Brian Woods, but at the end of the day, Brian Woods is very much like us in terms of the fact that he's a fan. Now, he has a sports lawyer background and all that, but his issue, to this point has been finances, because the reason why the structure is set up the way it is with the spring league, where players pay a fee, most of them do.
Yep.
There are some cases where they didn't, but in this past season, that was a little bit more of the case. Some guys didn't have to pay, but in the past, the reason why they had the structure of players paying $2,000 and change to play is because they don't have the finances to pay players. They just simply do not. They may have some investors involved in all that, but in the past they haven't. Now that may change moving forward, but like you said, Woods attempted to, run a genuine pro football league, the paid players. And even that, there were a lot of issues with that too. I don't want to relive that history. I'm not trying to be completely negative about him, but there was a lot of issues there with traveling teams being paid less than teams that were set up in markets. Employees complaining about never being paid. Obviously, it ended up in the courts, and there were settlements and all that. It took a while for that to settle itself out. So, Brian Wood's issue has been financing this whole time. And so when, this is a dream of his. The USFL is a league that he loved. This concept is something that he truly believes in, and this is a passion of his. So he wants to make this work. He finally has a partner in Fox, which that partnership is developed because of the XFL in a strange roundabout way, because Fox, made the introduction or was introduced to Spring League and Brian Woods because of the Spring League's involvement with the XFL when Fox was on hand for all the test sessions, broadcasting and rules sessions and everything else. So that's where this partnership was formed. Fox is a big part of this. They're a selling point.
Right.
When you're trying to sell,
selling point.
Yeah, they're the main selling point. When you looked at it with the Alliance of American Football, a big selling point for them, and even though they were paying to be on their networks, a big selling point for them was we're on NFL Network and we're on CBS. So they were trying to sell themselves as, hey, we could be the NFL's developmental league. And look, we're on NFL Network. So look how close we are to being. We're on their network. That was smart strategy. It didn't pay off in the end, unfortunately, because of, again, the finances. But and they were paying for the production side. They were paying Steve Mariucci and all these guys. So anyhow, the XFL. So for a while there, the AAF was using the NFL Network, the NFL even, to try to sell their league, and of course CBS and then TNT and all that. The XFL had such a tremendous partnership promotional package with, for a first-year league to be on ABC and Fox weekly, and to be on ESPN and their cable networks and all that, and then to have the type of broadcasting talent and production level, which was a key factor, those networks paying for the production and paying the Steve Levy's and the Diana Rossinis and everybody else. That was a key factor. Those networks gave the XFL credibility. So look, okay, so maybe this is not a joke, because look, hey, they're on network television every week. They're on ESPN. They're on prime time. So, this is big time. These are big time. This is where the NFL plays games. The NFL plays games on Fox and ABC and ESPN and all that. So anyway, the same thing can be said now for the Spring League, which we know as the USFL. They're going to sell Fox to these markets. Hey, that's their biggest selling point. We're on Fox. Own a team in our league, we're on Fox. So Fox has to deliver in terms of showing how invested they are. Because once these markets and potential owners see that Fox is really 100% all in, doesn't have to necessarily be 100% financially, just 100% all in and promoting this league, putting it all over their networks.
They got your back,
Yeah, they got your back. Like this is legit. So then you look and you go, hey, what's the selling point? Like if you say the USFL's coming back, oh really? It's going to be on Fox. Really? Okay. So, it's our games are going to be on Fox every week. Oh, okay. So that's a big selling point for the league. That's what they're going to use to try to sell the league to potential owners, and then obviously to sell tickets and everything else. So sponsorships, all that. So I think there's a chance for them to capitalize on the absence of the XFL and the uncertainty of the XFL. And by getting to the market first, which the AAF did, unfortunately didn't work out for them. But if they do things right, so we're going to see, we'll see how it goes. But I think the USFL has a fighter's chance, but there's so much uncertainty and unknowns with how it's going to operate that right now it's hard you can't bet on these entities to begin with. You expect, to be honest with you, I've been following them since I was very young. I expect them all to fail because the odds are so, and not that the concept isn't a great one. I think it's great. I just think the odds are against them because it's hard to make it work financially and have the patience to make it work. And
True.
so, a
The,
lot
the,
of these
the time
leagues collapse.
definitely the time frame, and we talked with the XFL. It's always it comes up, when's the time frame of profitability, because there's always with football, it comes up, you're going to lose money. You have to go in assuming when you make a new league, you are going to lose cash at the start. It is guaranteed. You cannot assume you're going to be hitting the black in terms of sales or any profits whatsoever. So absolutely, the time just seems to run out on these leagues. I see what Woods is doing in terms of how it's about efficiency in the cost management. It's about trying to find stuff that you do want to spend on and what should be the necessities, if not, and for things you don't want to be too eccentric or, as I would say, reaching too much out there, but you want to still make a product that's exciting. I get that aspect when watching the TSL and how it's developed over the last few years and how it's become from an experimental camp to, hey, we actually put on production that looked legitimate last spring that people would maybe want to watch if we promoted this. So, it's definitely come a long way. It's gotten that feel. And so if you use it in USFL with Fox's innovations they used with the XFL broadcast, there is something there. But yeah, uncertainty with the ownership. I mean, Fox definitely has me bought in as the one part that I'm like, if anyone's going to do it right, it's them, because they want to have that as their little, maybe a potential nest egg they can have as a sporting league that they own or that they
Right.
possibly
I feel
own.
like I'm repeating this too much, and perhaps I am, but I feel like you get what you put in. So like
Yes.
if Fox decides, hey, this is low risk for us, low cost, let's just keep doing what we were doing. They're giving us a decent amount of viewership. We don't have to put money into this, So if they take that approach, then it's not going to go very far, and it'll
Yes.
peter out and die.
Mm-hmm.
If they take the approach like, you know what, we believe in this concept. We did it with the XFL and did well. We did it with TSL and it did reasonably well, all things considered. Let's really put something into the USFL. Let's contribute here in a big way and let's push this. We believe in this concept. Let's go all in. Eric Shanks and everybody there, if they take that approach and the finances are halfway decent and they're willing to take their lumps, then I think maybe they have a shot. I could see, I'm a little surprised, even though I've known about the USFL possibility for a while now, it's been in the works ever since these two entities came together.
Mm-hmm.
A little surprised that they're trying to, the plan is to try to jump into full markets this quickly. I understand where it looks like maybe things are getting better on the COVID front. We'll see. Things are improving in terms of vaccinations and all that, but we'll see how it goes. Attendance is coming back to a lot of different entities and entertainment fields, and hopefully things go all right. But I'm surprised that they're jumping right into markets. And I see the potential and the possibility that even though they have the opportunity to have full attendance at these different venues and markets and in these markets, that they might still do the hub city thing because they're not ready yet to go into 10 different markets and set up shop. So that's why it's not going to be sexy, but from a financial standpoint, from the baby steps approach that the Spring League and Brian Woods has been taking, it makes sense for them to buy themselves more, to save themselves money and buy themselves more time.
Right. And I want to bring up the TSL here because the other question became instantly once the USFL announcement came out, what happens with the TSL? Because you could, in theory, make this a developmental feeder for the USFL, maybe in the years upcoming, say like that. There's some people that theorize like, well, they already charged $2,000 for the camp. What if you take the money from that, move it to the USFL, and you can keep funding it that way? It's a little extra income to help boost that product. Then there's talks that just dissolves entirely. I mean, some of us, myself included, have discussed that, if we're talking structure, TSL has many of the pieces, at least coaching wise, that if they needed USFL coaches and assistants and anything of the like, you can just pull those resources right now for the most of them, at least. And they would say, yeah, I'll sign up. I mean,
a lot of those coaches, you're right. A lot of those coaches want in. A lot of those Hal Mummy, Jerry Glanville, all these coaches, they want in on the USFL. Now it depends where they're located and all that. Some of these coaches that, are Northeast based, might not want to go to the South. That's and true. Stay there for 3 or 4 months or what have you. So we'll see. It depends how long their season is. But yeah, they do have those, as you mentioned, they do have those coaches. And you could keep the Spring League. They haven't decided yet. They're, like you said, there's a possibility of them keeping the TSL afloat just so it could help them fund USFL and use it as a minor league feeder system and all that. benefit your league. So there's a possibility there. Again, cost, finances, expenses, all that comes into play. USFL is going front and center now, so it's TSL fades into the background. I mean, I suppose you could run the camp and televise the games that you have. In the past, TSL had games. It would just be over the course of the weekend. It would be 2 or 3 games on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday kind of deal. And sometimes he would do it over a couple weekends. So they can still do that. I mean, we'll see what happens with the spring league. I think it can serve its purpose, but they got to get the USFL house in order first and figure that out before they can figure out what they're going to do with the spring league.
Now let's talk coaches, by the way, since I brought that up. Mummy and Glanville both have stated, at least publicly, they want to be in on this. They like the idea. I mean, obviously we can talk about others that were in the XFL. I mean, Gilbride I don't understand, hasn't said anything, but I mean, he liked the TSL and what it's doing. He's talked about how he likes developing players. So in theory, you could use that as a way of going in there too, if we're talking maybe a speculative sort of sense. But there's 2 coaches you mentioned in your write-up. That one, I'm not surprised by. The one I'm going to mention, Steve Spurrier, because of how he's talked about even rejoining the XFL when it relaunches at that point, and his history with the USFL being with the Tampa Bay Bandits as well. But Wade Phillips, I was like, really? I read that up and I went, okay, he is retired right now, still wants to get back into football when he last mentioned it, actually on his own Twitter feed. Yeah, he's actually wide open. So please talk about that.
He visited the spring league during this past session in May and June, and he was actually featured prominently on the Fox broadcast. They showed him in the press box watching the games, and he has a desire to get back in coaching. And from a location standpoint, with teams like Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, all potentially in the mix for USFL franchises, makes sense for Wade to potentially coach in Texas, which is, where his roots are, his father and everything else. So, I mean, it makes sense from that aspect. With somebody like Wade Phillips, who has his resume, you're going to have to pony up some money to pay these coaches. Now, if you're having just a 3-week season or a 4-week season or a 5-week season, maybe you can pay him a little bit less than you normally would pay a coach over a 10, 12, 14-week span. But I think guys like with the resume like Wade Phillips, you're not going to be able to get them on the cheap. So same thing with Steve Spurrier. So Phillips is an interesting name. You got to remember, for us, for people who follow these leagues and who follow college football closely, a lot of players like Darnell Holland are players from Kennesaw State, are players that I'm familiar with. But a lot of the mainstream and the casual fan is not familiar with a lot of the players in the spring league or leagues like the XFL, AAF, etc. There are exceptions here and there. Sure. But the individuals a part of your football league that lend the most credibility and then have the most name recognition are your coaches, usually in these types of leagues. So getting a Steve Spurrier or getting a Wade Phillips lends credibility towards your league. You can go the younger route and go after young coaches that are very talented that people don't know about, but it's not going to help from a selling your league standpoint, from a marketing standpoint. So you can see why respected veteran coaches like Phillips, who has the connections in Texas, Spurrier, obviously in Florida. He's a proponent of these leagues. His career would be coming full circle if he ended up back coaching the Bandits again in Tampa or wherever. So you can see why the USFL would have interest and would look to make their first big announcements, have these individuals attached to the league. With the XFL, a lot of people looked at the name of the XFL and they thought, what's going on here, when originally it was announced that it was coming back in 2018. And once you started seeing some of the football names that were involved, the Oliver Lucks, and then obviously you started, wow, Bob Stoops is going to coach in the XFL. Right. So then that was like, that raised some eyebrows. So I think the USFL is going to need to build up attention for their league and build up credibility. They're going to have some names, and it's not going to be, I know people will start writing and talking about the possibility. Hey, what about Colin Kaepernick in the USFL? But you're going to have to pay him more money than you probably would have to pay the full team.
Well, geez, Matt, remember his XFL ransom, for crying out loud,
Yeah. So, I mean, he's not going to come play for 20 grand. So, or 30 grand or 40 grand or whatever players end up getting paid. So the more, the merrier. So, anyhow, so the coaches are going to be the big figures here. And so those 2 names I'm not surprised that they've reached out. I know the USFL has reached out. Whether or not they agree, that remains to be seen. You would think Spurrier is a pretty good bet,
Mhm.
You know, they have to figure it out. That you think he's a good bet because he's a proponent of spring football. And I think even though the AAF ended up the way it did, he spoke so favorably about the experience. And I think there's something appealing to him about coming back to Florida and being part of the USFL again and all that. If this is legit, yeah, I think somebody like him wants to know that this is legit. He wants to know that the ownership is legit, that they're going to do the right things, that they're going to be trustworthy, that it's going to be worth his time. You know, because a lot of coaches, the veteran coaches, they don't want to mess with these types of leagues because they've seen how coaches and people have been burned in the past by them. So they really want to go to organizations that appear to be credible, that are actually going to be around. You'd hate to join the USFL and then 3 weeks in the season's canceled because they don't have funding, or half the teams can't play anymore because they can't afford to pay their players or whatever. So you hate to run into that kind of situation. So I think Spurrier would want some guarantees before signing on, but he's definitely a target. There's definitely been talks, and it wouldn't shock me if that's their first big announcement.
I would love to see Bandit Ball return back to Tampa Bay, even with Tom Brady and that whole championship roster in the Bay Area. I mean, it would be amazing to see just the original guy go full circle and, embrace embrace what was kind of an underdog scrappy team in the original run. I remember one of my favorite moments researching the USFL and kind of getting more into it. There's a 2009 documentary for 30 for 30 that was bringing up just kind of the behind the scenes. And at least from the 84 and 85 seasons, the Tampa Bay Bandits and the Jersey Generals, just based on mentality as well as kind of the power struggle of the league, had that rivalry between the two teams. And I would
It
love
was
to
pretty
see that
awesome.
come back in
It
some
was
way.
pretty awesome. They both had owners. They had owners that promoted the teams heavily and went out and got big time players. And Tampa was like a beloved franchise. Their ownership was
Yes.
beloved, and Spurrier was beloved. They've played a fun brand of football. And the USFL, made a lot of good inroads, did a lot of good things. They had a lot of bad owners that dragged the league down, and they had top end teams that were successful and that were well run and that actually paid the bills. And then they had low end teams that never paid their players. They had players that were going to owners' houses with guns, trying to, extract a couple of dollars. So you had a lot of silliness in the USFL. But yes, Tampa was a strong market way back then. You want with the USFL to borrow a little bit from the past, to tip your hat, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But you also don't want to be completely nostalgic driven. You want to have some new flavor there. So you got to have a delicate balance there, so you want some new aspects. So you're not just rehashing old things, but there's, you can see the reasoning behind wanting to get the Bandits back up and running again. It would be fun for nostalgia purposes, and I think it would work.
Yeah.
Now you have to figure out. Now, one thing, I'm sorry, Zach.
Sure.
With Florida, you got to figure out the finances, because in the AF there were problems with the Orlando Apollos in terms of lining up insurance, and then in the XFL they had to get a little creative there. What they did with Tampa in terms of working that out too. So right now, the Orlando Renegades, the Tampa Bay Bandits, and the Jacksonville Bulls, they're all trademark team names, former USFL names. They could all end up being in a league, but it's where they're going to play, and you have to figure that out. You have to figure out that side of it. But yes, Tampa would be a fascinating return to the USFL with Steve Spurrier on board.
Right. Steve Spurrier probably knows plenty about issues with Florida just from the AAF just a few years ago, for crying out loud.
Right.
And some of his sentiments for spring football again popped up even with that closing. Love that team. Thought that, obviously was one of the biggest proponents for them getting their championship rings, which eventually they actually did get those. So that was a nice little tidbit too. But yeah, nice. I would love to see Bandit Ball return, and just some other teams return as well, just from reading up in the past. Wasn't alive at the time, but I love the USFL just for the fact that, to me, it's the most successful. Like, this can be a thing if you run it right. And one of the aspects with this potential structure for going back to trying to sell franchises, that does actually bring up the question. We've seen single entity dominate the AAF as well as the XFL with terms of relaunches. I understand the funding aspect of getting a franchise put through, but obviously the history of the USFL revolves around how franchise owners brought down the league in its own right. The original creator of the USFL, for crying out loud, left and sold his team because they blew over cap budgets that he tried to set. That's what is kind of fascinating to me. Now you see this, we're talking about potentially doing this again, and I'm going, how do you learn, or you have to find a way to learn from that and get people that you can trust that don't repeat history.
I agree. One of the things that hurts the credibility of these leagues when you have multiple owners, and then in the early stages of your league, all of a sudden teams are folding or relocating or swapping franchises like they did in the USFL.
Yes.
If you have that going on in your league, it sends a bad message and image and perception of your league. You want stability. So if all of a sudden the Orlando Renegades become the Boston Renegades, and now they're the Jacksonville Renegades, and now they're shutting down and they're relocating, we're going to change the name in year 2. If you start having that going on in your league in the first few years, I know it's happened to many pro leagues over the years. Everybody's had their bumps in the road, but it sends a bad message to the public that this league's not going to last, that it's not for real. Look, it's already got teams folding. It's already falling apart. The UFL had ownership issues. Paul Pelosi with the Sacramento Mountain Lions, which was originally the California Redwoods.
Yeah.
They had, famously Denzel Washington's son, John David Washington, played for Sacramento, and you had Dante Culpepper and the late Denny Green and everything else. They had issues paying their players. The players didn't have anything to eat. They didn't have lodging. They didn't have equipment. They didn't have athletic tape. There was like major issues with these, you had these billionaire owners that weren't taking care of their teams.
Man.
They certainly had the resources and the funding, but for whatever reason, they were flaky. So you can bring down an entire league. One bad apple can bring down a whole bunch. So you can bring down an entire league if just one of your owners is not reliable and doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. It's hard enough getting one reliable owner, let alone 8 or 9 or 10 or more. The USFL had that problem, is they tried to have 18 teams plus. They went too big too soon. And when you do that, the odds of you failing increase, because if it's just 5 or 6 or 8 teams, say, or 10 teams, you got a better shot than trying to, have 24 strong franchises right out the gate. So anyhow, but yes, I think you have to tread very carefully when you're securing owners. That takes a lot of vetting. I mean, look, the Alliance of American Football, they did the Reggie Fowler bit. We saw how that went. He bailed on the league. They wouldn't let anybody know that he bailed on the league before the league started, because they didn't want to, and then they were scrambled to get Tom Dundon involved. And then he saw the books and he saw how awful, things were financially for them, how things weren't structured properly. And then he was going to be basically losing money. So he saw it as a losing proposition. He decided to just pull the plug on it. So, and Dundon has the resources and all that. So you need owners that not only have the resources, but that are committed, that are fully committed to. They're not going to just bail first chance they get. So we'll see how it goes with USFL, but they have to tread carefully. I mean, we could see a situation where they're in hub cities and only a couple of the teams have owners, and they're trying to sell the other franchises for the 2023 season before they move them. So it's a little bit awkward, the whole setup, I know. But I mean, like, this is just, just the way it goes. It's not an easy endeavor to pull off.
No, not at all. I mean, hey, if we're talking relations wise, like talking arena football, it's kind of a similar aspect where you have to have a dedicated owner, and you have to be able to make sure that you're funding and doing all the bits that are correct, right? And at least in a PR aspect, you're talking not paying players, or, that's something that drives me crazy with some arena teams in my own talks, is not paying players. Lodging becomes an issue. The shady kind of at least contract negotiations as well. Like, these things, I worry about stuff with when I hear franchises that are not like NFL franchises that can lean on, profit sharing and, different TV deals and such. So,
it's crazy, Zach. When you follow leagues like this, and I'm a huge NFL fan too, even in the NFL, the players always get the short end of the stick. Now they're paid on a scale that's so much different than what we're talking about here with the Arena League. I know, but even at the end of the day, like players who've been injured or players who've had concussions, they get screwed over, for lack of a better term, at the end of the run, when their careers are over, when they're no longer of value to their teams. Now, forget about it. On the alternative pro football league structure, or on the Arena League structure, the players always get the short end of the stick. The owners are sitting there and the leagues are sitting there figuring out, okay, how can we short them a little bit? How can, they're just going to take whatever we give them. So the players, I have so much respect for football players in these leagues, because especially in the spring league that we just witnessed, these guys are literally paying to play because they love football and they're just
Yeah.
desperately trying to keep their careers alive. And they're doing whatever it takes to do so. They truly love the sport. So, so I respect them greatly. And then it's a shame with indoor leagues and all that. You have to worry about owners that will try to, conveniently forget to pick up a tab or to take care of this or that. A lot of these leagues, a lot of these entities, they have players that pay for their own lodging. They have to worry about their own food.
Yeah.
They have to do all that kind of stuff. They're lucky to even get a paycheck from the team. So, on time. So or at all. So that's kind of the story there. So it is not an easy life, on being a football player on the indoor circuit or even on the alternate pro league side. Even players in the CFL have a rough go of it. I interviewed a player for the Toronto Argonauts, Darius Bledek,
Mm-hmm.
Dariush Bledek, who actually worked with his father in the offseason, to make ends meet because he had no money coming his way. And a lot of the players do that. He was working 20-hour days, 14-hour days, 16-hour days, 7 days a week just to make ends meet. And you would think pro football players that have been in a league for 3 or 4 years maybe have a couple dollars where they don't have to do that. But guess what? They have no choice. So that is life. So I respect the plight of the players, and then finding the right owners that actually care, give a damn about players, or at least hold up their end of the bargain, in terms of finances. That's important.
Yes, many factors at play, and stuff I worry about. Besides USFL, I think about that. But the players are the ones that always are taking the most risk, and I always wish the best for them too. And I love talking stories just because especially for guys that haven't made the NFL, it's always a new adventure and just trying to figure things out on the fly as you go until you either settle down or retire from the scene. It's a hustle. So it's definitely a hustle. Mike, as we wrap this up, thank you again for joining me here. Really appreciate the time. I kind of want to get your final thoughts here. What do you want the USFL to be? Ideally, I know obviously success and keeping long term and getting going, and it doesn't cancel in a year, unfortunately, like some of our recent leagues have. But what do you want this to be at the end of the day?
I would, long-term success is important, obviously, as you just mentioned. Credible. I want the league to be credible, how it treats its players, how it treats fans. The things that the XFL tapped into and the AF to some extent. I think the USFL has to tap into those things. I think the XFL struck a chord. It's the reason why people are still talking about the XFL. This is a league that, only played 5 weeks, and there are people still holding a candle for it. They might not play till 2023, and I know that's hurt the feelings and frustrated a lot of XFL fans, and rightfully so, who've been waiting patiently. But I think the USFL needs to provide the best possible football they can, innovative, fun for fans who watch it, for fans who are at the games, and then do the right thing by the players. These leagues, if they're in existence, if they make it, I'd love to be in a world where the USFL exists, the XFL exists. That means, depending on how many teams you have, you've got 400 to 500 players in the XFL. You got 400 to 500 players in the USFL. You have 300, 400 players in the CFL. So more jobs for coaches, players, staff workers, all that. And then, of course, media people too. When these leagues in existence open up doors for young journalists and young writers and podcasters and everybody else to cover. So you would like the USFL. Sometimes they say you can't go home again.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know you're gonna ever recapture what the USFL was like, the impact that it made way back when. But you want to capture the spirit of presenting quality spring pro football and to the fans, and so and having a strong league. So the USFL presented way beyond quality pro football. If you look at all the Hall of Famers that were in that league, I mean, within year one of the league folding, I think they had somewhere between 12 to 15 Pro Bowlers in the NFL. So that was a serious league in terms of talent, and the Reggie Whites and everybody else. So anyhow, you'd like the USFL to be credible and last. These leagues usually don't. And it provides so many avenues and opportunities for not only players and coaches and everything else. So you hope that Fox and Brian Woods and his outfit does the right thing. And you want to get to a world maybe in 2023. Sooner or later, this spring pro football concept has to work. We love football. I think it's a great avenue. There are not enough football jobs in the NFL. There are way too many football players in college that are talented that don't end up extending their pro careers. We love the second chance and third chance stories of football players, but there are a lot of football players out there that get no chance, never get an opportunity. So
Yes,
a lot of hidden gems and quality players that just never get an opportunity to shine. And that's what these leagues are about. And so I'm hoping that you can learn the lessons from the AAF and the XFL and the leagues in the past, and that they can, provide an innovative and fun product for the fans out there. So we'll see how it goes. You're cautiously optimistic. I'm anxious to see them try, because I know how hard and difficult the task is going to be. So I'm hoping that it turns out the proper way this time.
Yeah, we can only hope. Several months ahead, USFL has plenty more to release to the public still that, is currently being worked behind the scenes. Many of us are anticipating something exciting brewing, and, like you, I hope the best. If anything, the ELF and how they did it in 1 year prep time has me confident that there is a turnaround that can work. So I hope that is the case, as we get the best case scenario.
That's another
like
entity. That's another entity, and maybe perhaps in the future, if the USFL is smart, maybe they can work with the ELF, set up some type of global draft, exchange players, that kind of thing. Expand their outreach a little bit. So yeah, I've been impressed with the marketing and how quickly the ELF has done a nice job. It's done a nice job. Absolutely, for a first-year league right out the gate, very good job. The more of these leagues exist, the better it is for players and for football fans.
The buzz term as of late has also been global reach, it seems. So,
Yeah.
if you can start growing the game,
coming. It's coming.
It's going to be there no matter what. XFL, ELF, CFL with theirs, someone's going to go global. The NFL, I mean, the list goes on. The world is your
NFL. Yeah, the NFL they're increasing it. They're definitely going all in terms of staging more games internationally over the course of the next few years. With Germany and everything else, London and Canada. They're going back into Mexico. They're going back in those places. Thankfully, we're getting a little bit past things with COVID. We'll see what happens. But yeah, international, global reach, that is definitely the word of the day. A lot of sports leagues are headed that way.
I'm looking forward to what lies ahead, at least in the world of football. It's been amazing. It just it's growing, and I love that even though we have, of course, risks with any of these new leagues, there's the fact that they're being coming up. It's just incredible to me. Mike, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it a lot, and I look forward to your next write-up here. Always enjoy the readings.
Thank you, Zach, very much for having me on.
The Gridiron Gallery podcast. New episodes every Friday on your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and premiering first, as always, at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, only on unhingedsn.com.